Hello and welcome to another episode of the Anxiety RX podcast. I am your host, Dr. Russell Kennedy, a medical doctor and neuroscientist who dealt with crippling anxiety for a very long time. And today I have with me Kendra Fisher, and we talked a little bit in her podcast about a month ago, and we had such a good time. I thought, well, you got to come on the Anxiety RX podcast, Kendra. So how's it going?
It's going wonderful, and you're stuck with me now,
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's,
No, it's good.
it's how it goes.
Fellow Canadian, Toronto here, outside Toronto, eh?
Toronto.
I was
Hey,
born outside
Toronto,
Toronto. I
hey,
was born in Brampton.
I'm not far from you. I
There.
spent a lot of time in Brampton, but only
Yep.
because we played a lot of hockey there.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. So, what's your background, Kendra?
Partly Scottish. No.
Well, you can start there. Nothing
I
wrong
was
with that.
going to, but then I was like, I don't actually know it all. I have failed at the Ancestry 23 or
Really?
whatever it's called.
My mother's from Glasgow, so it's like I
My father
know
was
for
born in
sure.
Scotland. My
Yeah.
mother was born in Ottawa. So
So you're going to live to 106. You
I
know.
I
So we
mean, that's uh, g maybe,
the
maybe.
Scottish genes, man. Like my
That's
mother,
it.
91. She's had 2 hip replacements in the last 4 years. She's still fucking going.
I love it.
She's
I love
still
it.
doing it. Now
Yeah.
she's still anxious.
As
Right? So
well, I
that's the thing. You
mean,
live to 106 and, if you're anxious every day, that's no fun. But,
no, that's why I paused there and I
yeah.
was like, "Okay, hang on a second." But right now, I'd be okay with it. Right
Okay,
now, like where I'm
good.
at today, I could do 106.
So
I'd
what's
rather
changed with your
105
anxiety
because it's a
then?
multiple of 3, but
Okay. Or
yeah.
108, that's the magic number, right?
um my background, so my background with anxiety is not quite as definitive as yours, only because I don't know as many medical terms as you.
Okay.
So I didn't get to carry all the fancy diagnoses.
Mm,
But yeah, I grew up small town, good family. I'm a hockey player, and I'm a hockey player that
a
wanted to play for
goalie.
Team Canada.
Yep,
Goalie,
yep,
goalie. There, I mean, and right there, right? End of story.
yep.
That explains a lot.
Caretaker.
But yeah, so growing up, that was kind of always the dream. Team
Mm,
Canada. I wanted to play in the Olympics, and in my late teens, I got into a car accident, and car accident, I don't believe at all had anything to do with the cause of
mm,
it, but I think it had to do with the period of time in my life where all of the sudden I couldn't be as active, I couldn't be as social, I couldn't be as engaged, and that kind of very carefully built routine that was my athletic life, it got put on pause and gave me the perfect storm
mhm.
to discover this the beast within that
Yes.
was anxiety. And
Or alarm, as I call it. But
yes,
yeah.
yes. And I tried to cope. I
Sure.
went to all the doctors. I did all the right things, quote unquote. I Everybody told me how healthy I was. Um, I tried to self cope. I drank a lot to try to not deal with it, and that didn't work. And unfortunately, it kind of all came to a head. I was heading out to Team Canada tryouts in Calgary. And at that point, I was a shadow of myself at best. And
How
by the
old were you,
time I
Kendra,
got
at that
out
time?
there,
How old were you at that time?
would have been 20-ish,
Okay.
20, yeah, 19,
Yeah.
20, just before my 20th birthday.
That's when it
And
really got me too. I
yeah,
think that's when it hits a lot of us is, kind of on the verge of maybe, moving into adulthood, moving out of the house,
yeah,
all this kind of stuff. Like all of the stuff just sort of came crashing in. And then, you being a super achiever and me being a super achiever, we go into achievement to try and stave off our
oh,
anxiety.
absolutely. Yeah,
And it works, sort of, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And then our brains tell us, hey, this, hyperactive, looking after others, overachievement thing is the only thing that's helping you. And, we just ride it till the wheels come up.
Yeah, and I did. I truly did. I mean, I unfortunately I got to a point, I got out to that camp and I knew I wasn't gonna be able to hide it. And at that point that was the goal. That was
Mm,
the singular focus was how do I make sure nobody in Team Canada hockey knows I'm falling apart inside.
right.
Um And the next day I met with the coaches and tried to explain to them what was going on. Again, totally believing it was entirely physical, that the doctors and the specialists had just missed whatever the diagnosis was going to be, and it was going to be catastrophic and tragic.
Mm.
Yeah, I went to the coaches and tried to explain that something was up, and they asked me that day if it helped to know that I made Team Canada. I think they thought taking that pressure off me might be the answer, and it certainly was. It was memorable because
You
those are
think
the
it might
words
have
I
made
had.
it worse in a way?
Well,
Like I see people like, they get to the top of the mountain, like a lot of us, we look at the top of the mountain and we think once I get there, I'll be okay. Cause I used
yeah,
to think when I was younger, because my dad had schizophrenia, right? Like my big fear in life was developing schizophrenia and bipolar like my father.
yeah,
So I had told myself in my early 20s, look, if you make it through med school,
hmm,
you don't have schizophrenia because people with with schizophrenia aren't going to make it through med school. It's going to be
yeah,
too taxing for them.
yeah,
But the trial by fire that I went through, and then when I finally got to be a doctor, my anxiety got worse.
yeah. Because now you
And I
had
was
more
like, I
information.
made it, and the whole thing that I'm thinking, if I make it to this point, if I get to the top of the hill, I made it. I'm not mentally ill, and then but going through med school made me mentally ill. So that's why I ask about when you reach that pinnacle, there's nothing left to kind of buffer it anymore. When you're looking up at something and you think, okay, well, once I get here, I'll be okay. And then you get there and you're not okay. The whole thing just crumbles.
Yeah. Well, and I wasn't, and
Yeah.
my answer to that was it's one of the hardest things I'm ever going to hear because I quit
Mm,
right after they told me,
right.
and I left Team Canada. I flew home that night and went into the journey of finally receiving a diagnosis, and then 5 years. The only time I left my apartment was to go see a psychologist or go to hockey.
Right.
Couldn't be alone. Couldn't function. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. And 5 years later, realized that wasn't a life that was
Worth
worth
living.
anything to me.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of that moment. It was that moment of either I'm done, I give up, or there has to be a different way.
Hmm.
And then began the journey of kind of learning how to cope. And I mean, this is the paradox of where I'm at now because I've
Right.
just gone through this whole other transition. But
Of thriving. Yeah.
I learned to cope. I learned to cope, quote unquote, really well. I learned to cope well enough that for the past 14 years, I've traveled the world sharing my story and helping others learn how to get through those moments and, perhaps deal with the effects differently than they are currently. And I feel like I have to start this whole new tour now around the
Finding the
epiphany.
way out. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that is you know what? There's this really cool reality beyond coping, and it's called healing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've just arguably gone through one of the worst years of my life, and I feel better than I've ever
Doing okay.
felt.
Yeah.
And I don't that's such a cautious statement for me to
Sure.
make.
I get it. I get it. I get it. So what do you think has created this new Kendra?
um, I think that I had such a carefully constructed existence. Like
Mm,
when I learned to cope, I learned tools, I learned strategies, I learned resources. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I credit that period of my life with keeping me here.
sure.
And so I learned the necessity for movement and to stay physically active. I learned that I need to do something mindful, meditative, prayer, like whatever the modality is you want to call it. um, I recognize how nutrition affects it, how sleep affects it. I can engage in CBT and talk therapy and trauma therapy and I also had these kind of this team of supports in place. I had my psychologist from the time I was 19 until unfortunately she passed a few years ago. Um, and I had a family doctor who understood the complexity
There's a few
of,
of us out there.
are we
Yeah.
treating the anxiety today or are we
Right.
treating an actual issue today?
Yeah.
And she was so good with me.
Yep.
And I had my parents and some great people in my life who would hold me accountable when I wasn't the best person for the job. And
And what did that
th-
look like, Kendra? What did that look like, holding you accountable?
I think I got to a place in my life where I gave people permission to not use kid gloves with me. I
Mm,
mean, I'm not somebody who first off, I live with anxiety, and I am somebody who can manipulate and lie to support and justify every excuse in the book.
sure.
Like we are masters. We are masters of being able to justify why I can't do it today, or
Hmm.
why I'm avoiding this thing, or how it is this is going to be safe for me.
Well,
And
often, just to interrupt for a quick second,
yeah.
often the anxiety people are quite smart.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's and in a way, it makes it worse
Of
because,
course.
I love the David Goggins quote that says, "The mind has a tactical advantage over you," right? So it
Yeah.
knows all your weak spots, and you can't hide from it, and it
No.
will always sort of shove you into those little grooves, of pain, and you just
Certainly.
have to realize that this is what it's going to do,
Yeah.
and when you're aware of it and you can kinda see, okay, if you have health anxiety, it's like, I know my brain's gonna start coming up with, I'm sick, I'm dying, I'm like, and then I can look at it now and just kinda laugh at it like, "I
Yeah.
know what's coming,"
Yeah, I know.
right? Like, I know
Okay.
what I feel this alarm in my system.
Yeah.
My groove is to go into something's wrong with me.
Of
And now I
course.
can almost laugh at it because it's
It
like, I know it's coming, right?
yeah.
And you can get some power over it because you
Yeah.
know it's coming.
Yeah. And so for me, I mean, over the past couple of years, I had all of these and I mean, along with my alarm, as you say,
Mm,
and my responses to that alarm, there were also some real fears. I was terrified of surgery. I was terrified of losing my parents. I was terrified. I'm often faced with. I have a son who's a type 1 diabetic, so there's a lot of fear as a
sure.
parent, and the ability to navigate all of that. I mean, it was like one by one, the world was just flicking out those pillars and those foundations of like this carefully structured safety that I had created for myself. And, in the past year, unfortunately, I lost my father to dementia and Parkinson's, which
Mm,
was, I mean, eh, multiple years of
yeah, suffering.
that.
Yeah.
And it's a cruel, cruel
Oh, it is.
illness. And I got to be there. My dad was my best friend, and i
Mhm.
got i got to show up for him, and I got to meet him where he was at, and that was such a wonderful lesson for me, and it opened me in a way that I started to experience things a bit different, because I was so used to controlling. I had to be the puppet master. I had to be able to be the like chess master who was going to have all of the pieces in a way that I could tolerate. And I was very good at it. I was
Mhm.
very effective at that. But then I was diagnosed with endometriosis. My ability to move changed. My ability to work out the same changed. My ability to sleep, as
Right.
a first
Totally.
responder and as a parent of a diabetic, I'm waking up to alarms every night.
Sure.
And so I mean, kind of one by one, then my psychologist is gone, and then my doctor retires during COVID, and I'm a person who has health and medical anxiety working as a first responder during COVID. Like one by one, it was just kind of like the world was just setting me down and
Yeah.
pulling apart that safety system that I thought I had control over. Um,
And
and
you did to some
ultimately,
extent, and I think that's the illusion but
yeah,
it's exhausting. Like,
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
it's so metabolically taxing that you
entirely
never get a chance to rest. And then, when you do rest, a lot of us anxious people get really, uh, more anxious when we're
chaotic.
resting. It's
Yeah.
what I was thinking about this morning when I woke up, 'cause every morning I wake up with some kinda new thought, and it's like anxiety really skews your relationship to time,
Oh yeah.
because when you're in it, you're like, "Oh my god," not only is time painful, and I would say this, when I was going through the worst part of my anxiety, it was just like every day hurt. It wasn't
Yeah.
just like I was boring. I was, watching video games or, wasting my life away. Every day freaking hurt.
Yeah.
So it was like, why am I having to go through this stage where everything, and then time goes as, well, this is the only time you have and it's
Mhm.
hurting. So
Mhm.
you get this really skewed look at how you perceive time. And
Yeah.
then when the anxiety releases you, you kind of just kind of go, oh, okay, well, I guess it's gone now. It's like you
Yeah.
don't really do
Yeah.
anything about it when
No.
you have the resources to do something about it because you're
Yeah.
just so relieved it's gone. At
Yeah.
even for an hour.
Yeah. And and you're right, the exhaustion. I mean, it's honestly, and I often when I'm sharing my story, I talk about a moment when I was learning yoga and I was learning mindfulness in yoga. And it was the first time that I had ever effectively stopped a panic attack. I was laying there at the start of class, and it was always the worst part. Like,
Mhm.
everybody's like, you get into the room and they're like, "Okay, lay down on the mat, close your eyes, take some deep breaths." And I'm
Right.
like, "Do you know how terrifying it is in my head? Like, I'm not closing my eyes. You want me to be alone in here?"
Yeah.
And then, like, I would plan my escape. Like, I would set my mat up so I had a clear path to the door if I needed to leave, if a
Right.
panic attack started coming, if I got out. And I remember the first time it happened, it was, and I'm talking, this was like 7 or 8 years after I was diagnosed. So I was in that, like, the 5-year period of really learning tools differently.
Mhm.
And I started to panic and I started to engage a breathwork technique, uh, unknowingly. Like,
Mhm.
I at this point, because I had been practicing when I wasn't in crisis,
Right.
it came to me. It was available to me. And my panic attack stopped and I just started bawling. Like, I was,
Yeah.
like, on this mat and the level of relief was so incredible. But in that moment, I recognized how hard I had been fighting physically for so long, and mentally and emotionally. And my nervous system hated me. Like, I was beyond fight or flight. I was in freeze and I was just like, I was living there.
Yep.
And it was it was fleeting at the time. It was fleeting because I didn't have the ability to string a bunch of those together yet.
Mhm.
But I I got a taste of it. I got, like, this little
Yep.
sample of,
I get
like,
it.
wow, this is really what it's been doing to you. Um, and so, yeah, this year I just got to the point where I think, following that, my father passed. I had to have a major surgery, which scared the hell out of me.
Mm.
And shortly thereafter, there was a nearly fatal accident, um, involving my son and a support. I'm trying to be diplomatic here.
Mm.
Somebody that was supposed to be wasn't supposed to be administering medication, who showed up and almost administered what would have been a fairly difficult dose to counter, given
On
he had
insulin?
already been dosed with his insulin
Right.
minutes before that.
Right.
So, um,
Yeah.
I just shut down. I
Yeah.
I got to a place where it was like, I couldn't save my father. I had to have surgery. Now I have to recover. Now none of the things that I know to do to manage my anxiety and
Mhm.
my pain and my discomfort are available to me. I don't drink anymore. I don't,
Right.
there's no drugs, there's no substances. I can't go for a run. I can't go do yoga. I can't lift 10 pounds.
Right.
I can't sleep comfortably. And then this
Other than
happens
that,
with
you're
my
okay though.
son. Yeah. Right. And this is the thing. And then there's my son. And then I'm just like, I just shut down.
Yeah.
And it was the first moment where it was kind of like I was put in the place of, I think grief really led me to being able to experience a,
Surrender is
yeah,
basically, yeah. I mean,
yeah. And
I
it
think
was just,
that's
it was gone. Like, it was
it.
gone and it was complete. Like, it was a month of, like, sitting on my kitchen floor, recognizing I can't fight that hard
Mhm.
every single day and sustain it. And, oh, by the way, you're not doing as good of a job as you think you are.
Right. Yeah, it's like spinning plates,
Yeah.
and it just and then life just gives you more plates because when you're younger, you can often balance this stuff before you
Yeah.
have kids and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. You can kind of go through life. You still, I remember times where, I'd be horrendously anxious during the day and then at night go out with my friends and feel just fine.
Mhm.
Like, absolutely. And then I'd wake up the next morning with this horrendous, like every day, it was like Groundhog Day. I would feel it
Yeah.
every day. And a lot of it was just the illusion of being able to keep it all together because I was fairly competent at keeping
Yeah.
things together, right?
Yeah.
You were like the superstar in that particular area, but I think after a while, it's gonna break. Like something's gonna happen where you just can't hold it together anymore. And
Yeah.
there is a sense of surrender and peace in that I don't have to spin these plates anymore because
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. And that was it, right? And I think that I had been gifted through grief and through because there's also that piece, like what you were saying earlier about reaching that pinnacle.
Mm,
I got to this place where I had an opportunity to play for Team Canada. I mean, as a female hockey player,
right.
that's the
Doesn't get any
epitome.
better than that. Yeah.
And I when I had to walk away from Team Canada, gratefully, I credit hockey for a lot of my survival, and I was still able to play hockey. That was it. It was like
Mm,
this. My psychologist, my parents, it was very much, you're not going to lay down and die. So pick something. We don't care what it is, but pick
mhm.
something. You're not going to have nothing, no commitment.
Right.
You need to stay engaged somehow in living. And hockey was it. That was all I could manage. And so I was very, very blessed and grateful I could still play at the highest level of hockey other than Team Canada, but in the
Yeah.
various leagues up to the PWHL. Um, I was able to do that, and I credit that for a lot. But when I left Team Canada and, fast forward 2010 when I started uh, well, I in all honesty, it was a singular moment. Unfortunately, Darren Richardson, who is the daughter of Luke Richardson, who was in the NHL, she was part of the U16 Team Ontario program. And I happened to be at the Ontario Women's Hockey Association's head office when the directors came back from her funeral. And
Mm,
at 14, she had taken her own life.
right.
And I just remember in that moment thinking, I'm part of the problem. Like I'm part of the problem because my silence is and to me, and that's
Mhm.
not, I get it,
Sure.
that's my
Yeah, I
calling,
get it.
but for me what it felt like was very much, here I am living with mental illness somewhat successfully at that point, and I'm ashamed to admit it. I'm embarrassed to admit it. It makes me feel minuscule. And I in that moment felt called to not be quiet anymore, to
Mm,
share that, you know what, there's a lot of us living with this and you can still have a great life and this doesn't have to be a sentence. And I that was when I started sharing my story. And it was very evident for me at that point that I had then kind of shifted that mentality to, now I have to be the best at this.
yes, of course.
I
Yep.
I have to be the best speaker. I have to be
Right.
the best at managing my anxiety, and that caused so many more
Of
complexities because
course.
then it's like, how do you be great all the time? Well, you
Right.
don't. And then it's okay, well, how do you learn to be so vulnerable and so okay with, like, hey, there was a time in my life where I had to follow my friends down the hall to go to the bathroom because I couldn't be alone for that long.
Right.
How do I admit to that? Like, how do I allow that to be my identity and accept that? And so I've had these like various kind of progressions of, you get to a place and then you find comfort and you plateau because it's like, don't rock the boat. Just don't rock
Yeah.
the damn boat. I'm comfortable right now and I'm doing well. And then you realize how hard you're still fighting.
Yeah. But it is a gradation though. I think that I see a lot of
Absolutely.
these things, on Instagram and whatever. It's like, we have this rapid hypnosis program to cure your anxiety in a week. And it's like, it doesn't work that way.
Mm,
Your brain does not unwire. It's like what I tell people is I said, well, what if I said I could teach you how to unlearn how to ride a bike?
yeah.
Like, it's just
Right.
such an implicit program. It's
Yep.
such an automatic implicit program. And also it's coupled to this feeling of security. If I don't worry, that
Yeah.
whole, Dr. Kennedy, I'm worried when I'm not worrying, right?
Yeah.
Like that
Right.
whole thing, like that whole
Yep.
loop. And it's just this illusion that we get sucked into
Yep.
because in our brains, when we worry, we make the uncertain appear a little more certain. And
Mhm.
we get a little hit of dopamine in our
Mhm.
nucleus accumbens, in our motivation center. It's like, okay, you're on the right track. So even this is the whole basis of, people will pick an unfamiliar or a familiar hell to an
Oh,
unfamiliar heaven,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So we know it, and it's like that T-shirt that says, "I'm in my own little world, but it's okay. They know me here."
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
it is this thing where we get this familiarity, and human beings equate familiarity with security. So
Yeah.
if you had this sort of hypervigilance, because clearly you were born a sensitive child,
Very much
like
so.
clearly. So, we sensitive people pick up this anxiety so quickly,
Mhm.
even with relatively minor, wounds or,
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
It wires us
Yeah.
differently. And
Yeah.
then we learn coping strategies. And unfortunately, the coping strategies just make it worse. Like
Yeah.
initially, they make it seem a little better initially in your brain. You
Yeah.
get a little hit of
Yeah.
dopamine and maybe a little bit of endorphins and enkephalins as well. So we get rewarded for making the uncertain appear certain, because what people with anxiety hate the most is uncertainty. Because really, uncertainty is just anxiety intolerance. It's
Yeah.
just being able
Yeah.
it's just being able to not tolerate the anxiety. And once you learn how to tolerate it, which it seems like, we were talking a little bit before we started today, and it just seems like it's not so much that you're tolerating, it's just like there's a smile on your face now. It's like, yeah, it's here. The
Cool.
alarm's here, and
Yeah.
it's there, and I deal with it. And then we learn, and this is also what we're talking about too, is you learn that you can help yourself.
You have
You
to.
know? Because yeah, well, but so many of us don't though.
Yeah.
So many of us look for this
Yeah.
magical other, this magical relationship, this doctor, this book, this program, whatever. This is gonna fix this. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no, no. They
Yeah.
can give you the building blocks, but
Yeah.
you have to decide that you're going to fix yourself, and that you're gonna be able to hold that anxiety, hold that alarm like the younger version of you. Because
Yeah.
if you keep
Yeah.
rejecting that younger version of you, that child is going to scream louder and louder and louder in
Yeah.
physiological alarm, which
Yeah.
of course your mind reads, and the mind has a tactical advantage over you. So it just makes the worries even greater. So you
Yeah.
get sucked into this place. So it's not so much surrender. And I was thinking about that when you first started talking today. It's just this embracing of it.
Yeah. And it's such a bizarre. It's a realization that I've kind of struggled with finding the words for, and I find myself trying to tell the story,
Mm,
and it's unfamiliar to me, which is beautiful, because what's familiar to me is fighting like hell.
exactly.
What's familiar to me is survival.
Right.
And what's not familiar to me is peace and
Yep.
ease. And I mean, I feel like it was just this beautiful combination. I'm forever going to believe, I think, that maybe this was one of dad's last ditch like efforts of
Mm,
parenting, and in everywhere it took me in the realization of losing him and putting me back into that childlike state of like, I'm daddy's girl, like,
yep.
and he's gone. And I I for the first time got to a place where I could kind of visit that trauma. I could
Mm,
visit the things that did happen in my youth that I could pinpoint. And I started to recognize, I just by chance and great, well, because it was supposed to happen, I
yeah.
ended up with one of my care providers on the team that supported me after my endometriosis surgery. Um, she does a lot in somatics, and she does
Mm,
a lot in, working from the body up instead of the cognitive. And I mean, I've done the cognitive. Like, I've done the
me too.
cognitive for years and years and years, and absolutely the value is there. But when I started to recognize how well paved those like superhighways are in my brain, from like my brain straight to every sensation in my body, and how quickly that allows my brain to go from a moment to catastrophe,
Hmm.
is uncanny. And so gratefully, by chance, I got introduced to my current physio, who is trained in these modalities, and trained in kind of the whole physiological pain, and also the psychology of pain, and also kind of the rewiring of the nervous
Yeah.
system. And so I've been working in that space, and I just got to a point where it was like I had this release of like going through a moment of being brought into where my experiences as a child took me. And I mean, I'll mention it briefly. I know that we've
Sure.
shared this before, but I mean, I had some instances when I was younger where I ended up in the hospital after medical procedures, and because of the day and age, parents weren't allowed in the hospitals. And my
Yeah.
memories of that were terrifying. I had a hemorrhage after a tonsil surgery. I remember laying on the floor at the nurse's station just bawling for my
Yeah.
parents
Yeah.
and feeling so alone and so scared. And in that moment, clearly, I somehow created the narrative that I'm going to have to fight for myself to stay alive, and I
Yeah.
am going to be doing that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I grabbed
You
it
know
and I
where
ran
that
with it.
that policy came from? The
I,
whole that parents couldn't visit the
I
children?
don't know, but
Okay, I'll tell you.
I'd
I'll
love
tell
to
you.
talk to them.
So yeah, so what happened was they would find that when the parents came to visit the children, when the parents left, the kids would freak out.
I
So what they
no
did
doubt.
was they said, "Okay, no more parents." So what
Mhm.
happens is the kids would go into this dorsal vagal shutdown. Like they would
Yeah,
just and the nurses would go, "They're so much more better. They're better behaved when the
yeah,
parents aren't allowed in.
yeah.
They're just but they're basically in emotional crisis.
Shock. Yeah,
They're in shock. They're
yeah,
they're they're stunned." Right?
yeah.
Of course they're more pliable and they're easier to deal with.
Mhm.
That's where that whole policy started.
Well,
And it caused so many problems, and
yeah,
especially for relatively minor surgeries like tonsillectomies and stuff like that, because what the people would think was, "Well, it's just a throat thing, they're probably fine." You're a sensitive kid,
yeah.
you need your parent, and all of a
Now I
sudden
can't
they're going,
breathe
"No."
and I can't
Of
swallow and
course,
I feel like I'm
of
choking,
course.
and I spent a life with emetophobia, and like
Yep.
I had to go to like I was registered for an exposure therapy program when my first child was about to be born
Mm,
because I knew, and for those of you who don't know emetophobia, I am terrified of puking,
fear of vomiting for
vomiting,
yeah,
fear
yeah,
of being around it, seeing it,
right.
experiencing it. um, very much from that choking feeling.
Sure.
I remember when I
Yeah,
was a child, like after that, and it's ingrained. Like it's phenomenal the impact it has. And now that I've worked through it, it's kind of, uh, I mean, I'm intrigued by it, which is maybe odd,
sure.
but I love it because now that I understand it differently, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
okay, that
Well,
makes
the
sense,
sen
and I'm okay. That wasn't my
this
fault.
The central nucleus of the amygdala, basically the cells in the amygdala, the central part of it, are the ones that are responsible for coupling things together. So if you go
Okay.
into a grocery store and you have a panic attack, the central nucleus of the amygdala will say grocery stores are dangerous,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's also the central nucleus of the amygdala that rewires that whole situation as
Mm-hmm.
well. So you've
Mm-hmm.
got the fox in charge of the hen house. So it just reinforces itself over and over and over
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to see the neuroscience behind how we couple these negative things together,
I love it.
and it's the same basis really of, where were you in 9/11? It's
Yeah.
the central nucleus of the amygdala. It locks in whatever you're experiencing in the time
Yep.
because it's evolutionary, right? It's like, okay, well, if you're experiencing this terrible thing, this
Yeah.
is a place that you should never go again.
Yeah, for
Right now,
sure.
it was meant to be survival based, but
Yep.
it winds up just causing a whole bunch of trauma for
Yeah.
people. You know?
And it I mean, as I've learned this, and there's a beauty in this. Like the
Yeah,
to me, the beauty of that, the absolute thrilling, amazing, deep, heartfelt gratitude I have for this realization is it can be healed.
yeah, and it's
Like,
not you. That's the thing. Like
yeah.
it's actually
Yeah.
neurobiological
Yeah.
wiring. It's
I
not some
didn't do
flaw.
anything
It's not
wrong.
some weakness.
Yep.
It's a neurobiologically wired step in your personal psyche
Yep.
that is not your fault. And
No.
it's not, you can't just fix it by going, well, I'm just not going to be afraid of vomiting. It just
No.
doesn't work
No.
that way. It just
Well,
doesn't.
no, for me, I mean, it was again like power shout out for exposure therapy. My
Yep.
firstborn had some amazing reflux.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
he was projectile
Mhm.
vomiting like 25, 30 times a day. And after the first couple of weeks of having him, I called, it was CAMH that I
Right.
was registered for this phobia program. And
Right.
I'm like,
It's like,
you know
I
what,
don't need it.
give my spot to somebody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And then just to double down on it, I was like, you know what? How about I become a firefighter? How about I
There you
go
go.
into a profession
Yeah.
where it's not uncommon?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how much. And I mean, I've always known this. That one was one that I mean, I wasn't thrilled with the options for exposure therapy for that
Sure.
one.
Yeah.
But
Well, you know what they're coming up with now for exposure therapy, and my friend Arash in I would say his last name Divanbach. He works at Wayne State University in Michigan,
okay.
and he's really big on virtual reality, augmented
Oh,
reality. So they
can't
put
even
headsets on
imagine.
people, and if you're allergic to spiders, they
Oh,
basically put you on the headset, and the headset looks like you're in a room,
yeah, oh yeah.
right? And then there's a
Oh, I
tiny
mean,
spider that goes across the wall, and you're like, okay. And then eventually they have bigger and bigger spiders, and it feels like, so you're training the amygdala. It's like, I'm in the presence of this. In the
yeah,
back of my mind, I also know this is not
you
real,
have that. Yeah.
but it feels so real
Oh, it
that you
does.
actually start changing the amygdala again. So that
Yep.
central nucleus of the amygdala changes and says, hey, this is no longer a threat.
Yeah.
So we're actually rewiring it in real time.
Yep.
And I think we're going to, like, I get so excited talking to him because it's like, I would love to have an avatar of my younger self,
Yeah.
at 7 or 8 years old, freaked
Yeah.
out by my dad, that I could sit in a room and speak with. And
Yeah.
it would appear like I'm speaking to Rusty. It would appear
Yeah.
like and it would appear like he is talking back to me. Just the rewiring that
Yeah.
that would create in your brain. And I think
Yeah.
that's where we're going with a lot of these new sort of AI type treatments for anxiety.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that holds the most promise.
Well, of course, because it's more tangible. I think
Yeah,
it's so much easier
it's
because I
feeling.
think a lot of the struggle with and, going back to the whole recognizing that you have to show up and participate is a lot of treatment and a lot of what we do to manage anxiety and to manage mental illness. There that tangible aspect isn't there. So it's kind of the like I'm doing all these things, is it really making a
Right.
difference? And the measurables aren't there. And so it's a lot harder than, say I want to gain muscle mass. Okay, now I can see a muscle.
Right.
So it's, A equals B. And it's a lot easier when you have that support for your brain to be able to pull from that and use that as evidence. But I mean, for me, this again, like I'm at this place where having started into that whole somatic experience and
Mm.
really trying to and with guidance. I mean, I will
Sure.
say that, the structure of having the appointment and having somebody who can guide you safely in and out of those moments. My last appointment, I had the greatest release of
Nice.
just everything. And it was shocking to me because I
Hmm.
could so viscerally feel it. I could so entirely feel and address it and felt so connected to that scared little girl.
Hmm.
And it was just kind of like, you know what, I've got you. I've got
Yeah.
you. And we're okay.
Yeah, and I think, so much of traditional therapy believes that all we need to do is change that thinking structure. And anxiety,
Yeah.
I tell people, it's really a state of alarm in your body. It's a feeling structure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that feeling structure doesn't speak the language of words, that left
No.
hemisphere linguistic linear language of words. So
Mhm.
you can ease it a little bit. And I think that's where
Yeah.
we get sort of pulled down the garden path a little bit because we think, oh, CBT works, CBT helps. We put people into a program, they score like 80 out of 100 in anxiety, and then when they finish the program, they're at 40. So it's
Yeah.
like, well, clearly this works. It
Yeah.
does work in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cognitive strategies do work, but they're not actually affecting the root cause of the problem, which is a feeling basic, which is why I think psychedelics, why I think augmented reality, somatic therapies, to some extent, parts work. These are all the things that actually build the foundation to get to a better state of feeling, because
Yeah.
we're feeling creatures. And
Yeah.
there's a part of our brain called the insular cortex, and the insular cortex kind of maps onto the body. And I do believe that this alarm that we have is mapped, for me, it's mapped onto my solar plexus. And it's like, because it's so intense that it takes us over completely. And this is
Yeah.
the other one of those little things that I wake up with this morning. I think when we do exercise or we get out somewhere, we realize that, hey, there's so much more to my insular cortex. There's so much more to my body than just this intense
Yeah.
sensation that we're
Yeah.
just unconsciously sort of handcuffed to all the time.
Yeah.
So when we feel, oh, there's more to me than this sensation, it's like putting, drops of red dye in a liter of water. It just diffuses. It's not so intense.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I think this is where I think we're going to heal anxiety in the future by treating it as this state of physiological alarm and treating
Yeah.
that, because I think if
Yeah.
you had to treat one of them, the thoughts or the feeling, treat the feeling first, because that's what's feeding the thoughts.
Yeah.
So that was a
Yeah.
bit of a rant, but
No, and I agree, and I think that there's absolutely still a ton of benefit to the tools and resources that we utilize to
absolutely. Cognitive stuff
support
too.
those feelings, because ultimately day-to-day life happens,
Yeah.
and there's that ability for ebb and flow and fluctuation, or something to catch you off guard. I mean, like, it's bizarre things sometimes that put me into that state of like, ooh,
Yep.
why am I feeling this? And I don't know that you can be prepared for all of those. But what you can be prepared for is how you react to them and how your body responds to it. And it's just this I had this moment yesterday. I was talking to my physio, and I was telling her, I've also, because I have to go all in on everything.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, now I'm healing.
Right. Oh,
So
yeah, no, that's your first I'm gonna be the best damn healer there is. Like,
I'm
there's
going to
no
be the
yeah.
best
Yeah.
speaker, and now I'm going to be the best healer. I'm going to be
Yep.
the best at healing.
Yep.
So it was like, what do I need to heal?
Right.
Like, let me get all of the things in place. And part of it was to go back to and revisit true trauma therapy from a psychological standpoint.
Mm.
And I will say that I had one appointment, and it was very valuable to me cognitively, because I feel like we did 10 appointments in one, just because I am
You
so,
had the basis. You had
yeah,
the
like, I
grounding, yeah.
am so experienced in CBT and
Yep.
in therapy, and that I was able to basically go to a provider and be like, "Okay, look,
Yeah.
here's where I'm at. This is the little piece that
Right.
I'm looking for some information on." And, just in having that one conversation, it was reframed to me in a way that I hadn't considered before, which was, you can rewrite the way you experience what happened as a child. You
Right.
don't have to continue to tie yourself to that little girl sitting on the floor alone at the nurse's station. You can picture your parents there with you.
Mhm.
Like, you can invite your parents into that, because they weren't not there because they didn't love you and support you, and you were alone and they didn't care. They weren't there because they weren't allowed to be.
Yeah.
And so, just that change of thought, and because I've practiced that,
Yeah.
it was great. But then when it came time for my next appointment, and even though it was a day that I was feeling a lot of grief, I was like, this isn't what I need.
Mm.
I don't need to think more about this. I don't need to cognitively attack this anymore. I can
Mhm.
let this be. This doesn't have to be the story that this isn't my identity anymore.
Right.
And it was such a blessing. And so it was kind of that whole, like, can I say I'm healed? Can I,
And I trust this. Yeah.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
can I say that? Am I being cocky here? Like, is this the moment that I say it and it's like, ha ha ha,
Yeah.
take this?
Your mind gets it.
But it's no, like, it's just and I'm not professing that I don't want to continue to learn more from, like, that whole sensory and feeling place, but I'm really at peace. Like, I
Yeah.
feel
I
really
feel that with you too,
good.
right? 'Cause
Yeah.
it's so this is what true healing is, and we were talking about this a little earlier too before we, hit record. But it is about learning how to do it for yourself and
Yeah.
feeling like, "Okay, I have
Yeah.
agency." And because when you were younger, when you were at that nurse's station, you didn't have agency, right?
No.
But now you show yourself that you actually do. And when you can start healing for yourself and you're not looking for this magical other, like I said,
Yeah.
to heal you, you become the agent of like, "Okay, this hurts, but I'm gonna take responsibility for the pain, and I can stay
Absolutely.
with the pain and build
Yeah.
some capacity and resilience in my nervous system." And I'm not against, this is the thing, like I do have a little bit of more than a little bit of a negative view of cognitive therapies because
Mhm.
they didn't help me at all. And I did them for
Yeah.
so many years and it
Yeah.
was part of my profession, like medicine,
Mhm.
like that was the gold standard of the anxiety. And I'm failing the gold standard of anxiety. So what does
Yeah.
that say about me?
Yeah.
But I realized that my little, hate on for cognitive therapy is misguided in a lot of ways. And really what I wanted to say is that we need the body part. We need the feeling part
Mhm.
probably first and the
Yeah.
cognitive part second, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
it's important to have both of those things.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, what we do in traditional therapy is we lean 90% onto the cognitive part,
Yeah.
which doesn't really work. I mean, it works in the short term. So that's I want to explain that
Yeah.
that's why my negative bias towards cognitive therapy is because it's very effective and very helpful to help you cope for sure.
Yeah.
But to
Yeah.
heal, you need that sort of feeling perspective of it. And
And
I
I
think because I see, I just want to finish just one thing,
no, no.
because I see traditional therapy leans so heavily into the cognitive, and it's like I want to yell at them. It's like this is not going to heal you.
Mhm.
Like medicine in general, like the pill I give you for your reflux isn't going to heal you. It's going to
Yeah.
make you feel better, but the
Yeah.
problem is still sitting there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that the truest way that I can depict that with my own personal experience is, following this past year, my inability to sit with discomfort was still 100% intact. Like
Mm,
I could not feel that level of grief and that level of pain and connect myself to any belief that I could survive it.
mm,
And it was kind of, I recognized in that moment very clearly how much I had poured into coping strategies that, again, I'm so grateful, but also I can only run so far. I can
mhm,
only run so hard. I can only
mhm.
lift so much. I can only
Right.
do so many charity events and speaking engagements and at the end of the day I still had this much tolerance, zero tolerance for the absolute discomfort of that sensation of loneliness and being alone and pain that came with that. And losing dad especially,
Yeah.
it really forced me to sit with that, and it really forced me into a place of recognizing that, like, as much as I thought, and in true Kendra fashion, like I was ready for this with
Sure.
that. I mean,
Right.
we had years. I knew it was coming. I was prepared, and I was in some senses,
Mhm.
like, I wholeheartedly am grateful he is no longer suffering.
Right.
I 100% am grateful for every second I had with him, and I know that I was blessed. There's
Mm.
no doubt whatsoever that I had a wonderful father who I have the absolute blessing of carrying so much grief as a result of having had so much love. Like,
Yeah.
that's fine. I'm fine with that. But
And I
what I
think
wasn't.
I think
No, please.
processing grief actually helps you process anxiety as well. I think
Absolutely.
pushing grief away
Yeah.
just adds more onto the pile. Sorry
And
to
that was
interrupt.
the thing.
Yeah.
Like 3
Yeah.
days after his funeral, I'm having surgery.
Right.
And now I'm laid up for weeks and weeks. And I can't run. I can't lift. I
Yeah.
can't distract. There's no,
Mhm.
I don't drink. There's no
Right.
external comfort available to me. And I had no choice but to feel it. I had
Right.
no choice but to be really, really uncomfortable. And it was the greatest gift I've ever received. And how, I mean, I truly believe that. I truly,
Yeah.
truly believe that being in a position where it was like, no, you don't get to pretend that you were ready for this and you're going to be unfazed by the fact that your dad's gone, because
Yeah.
that's not the case.
And I think what happens to our what's happening to our children now is that there isn't that adversity that they
No,
go through.
no.
So when you go through adversity, you build capacity and resilience in the new, provided it's repaired. So this is the thing,
Yeah.
like, if you
Yeah.
look at children who come from families who have trauma, who have struggle, but
Mhm.
they're repaired in
Yeah.
that, like the
Yeah.
parents or caregivers are good at repairing, saying, "This is bad," mother died, parents getting divorced. It's repaired in that situation. They unconsciously learn that, "Oh, yeah, stuff can happen, bad stuff can happen,
Yeah.
but things kinda come back."
And it can be
And
okay still.
but the kids who go through life who kind of silver spoon kids, a
Yeah.
lot of them who have a lot of money and
Yeah.
don't get that adversity, they
Mhm.
wind up being kind of colloquially called snowflakes because they never really had to build that capacity.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't recommend, people, having your father die and then having to go in for surgery, 3 days later to anybody. But it is one of those things that the things that we fear the most often are the biggest gifts, and
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
cliche and Oprah-like as that sounds, it really
It's
does
real.
allow us to realize, because the whole thing between the difference between fear and anxiety, fear is what's happening right now. Like, if there's
Yeah.
a lion in my face right now, that's fear.
I'm
But
scared
if
and that's real.
but if I'm thinking, "Oh, I hope I don't run into a lion on the street tomorrow," well, that's
Mhm.
anxiety, right?
Mhm.
So it's the ability to kind of know that when fear comes up, that you will deal with it. And so
Yeah.
many people with anxiety are so good at dealing with fear when it comes up because we've been on this playing field for a long time,
We
right?
are.
So we know what it's like. And
Yeah.
then so many people I would see in my practice have to go through like heart attacks, major surgeries, this kind of stuff. And they would handle it so much better than they think they would.
Yeah. Yeah, it it's odd what we find as blessing, but I mean, again, there's entire belief systems,
Yeah,
that are tied to this, and the value of suffering is real. Um, but I just, yeah, I mean, I again, like I can just see my dad laughing because I wouldn't have had the surgery. I would have
right,
skipped it if he was still. If he had hung on, I
right,
was prepared to move the surgery because I couldn't care for him once I had
right.
the surgery.
Makes
So
sense.
it 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 all worked how it was supposed to,
Yeah,
and it's been incredible. And further to what you said about, resilience, and, I'm fortunate. I think sports are wonderful for building
yes.
resilience, especially as a goalie.
Yep.
Um, and especially
Especially
as
as a
the
goalie.
only female goalie playing men's
Sure.
hockey up until,
Right.
my teens. So I think that there was a lot of that growing up, but there was also a lot of uh, that belief in myself that had developed
Mhm.
from trauma young, that I always had to be able to carry it. I always had to be able to show up and prove that I could do it. And so that's how I've managed anxiety. I'm gonna show everybody that no matter what, no matter how hard it gets, I can
Right.
still get up in the morning, and I'm
Right.
proud of that.
Yeah, and you should be.
And I am still, and I'm grateful for it. And that level of resiliency has really helped me. But I think that what we see a lot nowadays is avoidance is so like embraced.
Mm,
And to any parent out there, to any person out there struggling, I mean, the second you make that decision to avoid anything, or the second you make that decision even more detrimentally for your child, you are paving that superhighway
right.
between I can't manage and I can't do this.
Yeah.
And there are no detours. And that's a really scary place to be in all of a sudden when you're faced with something real, and when those moments in life do happen, because they'll shut you down.
Mhm.
And I was as prepared as I could be in terms of tools and coping strategies. But all of a sudden I got to that realization again that, hey, like, even with all of those, if I don't truly understand how to be uncomfortable and recognize that there's not an action for me to take, there's this discomfort,
There's no escape.
and I'm going to have to feel this.
Mhm.
And I'm going to truly have to connect to the fact that that's okay, that I can be safe. This isn't going to kill me. And when I started repeating that, it was kind of like, there was this super highway, and then over there was this beautiful, like, country road that I had never traveled on. And all of a
Yep.
sudden I could see it. And it
Yeah.
had been running parallel the entire
The
time.
whole time. The whole time.
And
Yep.
I was so focused on the road ahead of me and being the best at navigating that 8-lane
Right.
highway
Yeah.
that it didn't even occur to me that I could just go for a nice little country drive, and the same things in life are still going to happen. And that's not up to me.
Yeah. So what's your work now, Kendra? Like, what do you speak about? Like, what's your work in sort of mental health now?
Yeah, so I do a lot of one sharing my lived experience and kind of the journey from childhood through losing the dream of playing for Team Canada and a
Mm,
lot of the different coping strategies and how I've managed that. I also do a lot right now. So I work corporately. I work as a mental health coach with athletes, um, and in the workplace also with first responders. So I've kind of got that, and I'm getting a lot more into the schools again right now, just because the, the crisis we're
oh,
at
I know.
and where we're at with youth and adolescents with mental health right now is just it's heartbreaking and astonishing. And I think given everything that we've been through in the world over the past 5 years, it's I don't
Yeah.
think we're going to be seeing an improvement in the foreseeable future. And I
But
think
again,
that
I think,
there's
not to interrupt, but I think that things do have to hit a crisis point before things
absolutely
change, right? Like
I
that's the
mean, I'm
thing. It's
proof.
like the frog in the boiling water, right? Like,
Yeah,
the old
yeah,
story, you throw a frog. I don't recommend this.
yeah,
So you throw a frog in, the story is, the metaphor is you throw a frog in boiling water, he jumps out right away. But
yeah,
if you put him in water and you slowly crank up the temperature until it
yeah,
starts to boil, he'll stay there and die.
yeah,
And I think that's kind of, and we need that crisis point and that kind of thing to be able to see that we can hold the pain. Now,
yeah.
this is but setting up places for yourself, like setting yourself up the best
Certainly.
opportunity you have to
Yeah.
deal with it. It's not like we're saying, hey, go to your
No.
bed and just
No.
wallow in this pain.
No,
You need the support.
and that's kind of the work I do. I mean,
Yeah.
I help people figure out how to create a safe space for themselves to learn where they can connect and what they can connect to hopefully help them find a way through. And I think that it's so important. I mean,
Yeah.
we are a society of people who, whether you like it or not, you're not meant to do it alone.
Right.
And
Even
community
though
and
the left brain will
connection,
tell us that. Even though
yeah,
that left
community and
brain kind of,
connection
yeah.
are so paramount. And we have spent too many years kind of glorifying that whole
Yeah.
I am stronger on my own, and if I want it done right, I'll do it myself, and I'm guilty of it. But at
Oh
the
yeah.
end of the day, creating places where we can show up in honesty and just be perfectly imperfect is kind of my shtick. And I think that we spend so much time in life not recognizing how much we need each other
Mm,
and the value in recognizing we all have a role to play in showing up. Because at the end of the day, I can't tell you a doctor that kept me alive. I can't tell you
mm.
a one practitioner that kept me alive. What kept me alive was, the people who were willing to sit with me in a room that was too scary overnight. And I just needed, I needed to know I wasn't alone in that moment. And what kept me alive were the people who, instead of, you know, I'm not doing well, so let me lay on my couch for a week at a time and do nothing. It was,
Right.
you know what, you've got a day. We'll give you a day of grace, but on day 2, you're getting off the couch because you know you're not helping yourself. But most importantly, what I share and that I think is so important is teaching people to be a support as well. Because I think a lot of
Mm,
people would like the opportunity to be supportive, but everybody is so scared of getting it wrong.
great
And
point.
what I say to that is, you know what? It's not about having the answers. It's not about fixing me. Nobody could have fixed me. There's
Yeah.
not a single person in the world that could have fixed me. But I am going to respond far more to the person who says to me, "Hey, I'm going to come by and we're going to go for a walk." I'm going to respond to that a lot better than I am somebody on the phone saying, "I think you need to go for a walk."
Mm,
And I think that that's the difference, because directing somebody to go do something further alone,
yeah.
disconnected, feeling
Yeah.
like they're in crisis is it doesn't have the same. What we have to give each other is time and presence and showing up, and we all have that to give. We just have to recognize it.
I think that's very true. So, Kendra Fisher, how do people find you?
Uh, my website, kendrafisher.com, has links to all my socials on like 99.9% of the socials.
Okay.
I think I'm kfisher30. Um, Instagram for sure, TikTok, my YouTube channel, I believe. Also have a podcast, Speak Easy with Kendra Fisher, where you can find Dr. Russell Kennedy and another wonderful conversation. Um, but yeah, and otherwise I'm traveling North America and sharing my story and trying to help people set up a better structure to preventatively start working towards stronger mental health and resiliency, as opposed to waiting till we're in crisis to figure it out.
Yeah. And there's no better teachers than the ones who've been there. Right. So,
Well, I've
and I think
spent a bit
that's
of
it.
time there.
Yep. And me too. And me too. So, thank you so much, Kendra. I really appreciate talking with you today.
Absolutely my pleasure. Always lovely.